Good morning and welcome to another episode of Unscripted and Unchained RPG Review. I am DM Bluddworth, and as you can see by the graphics, today I'm rolling out a new feature. At least I intend for it to be a fairly frequent new feature called Dungeon Mastering Tips and Ideas That Worked. So, just to give you a little bit of background for this, tips are ideas that I have heard from other DMs out there, and so that's how I differentiate between tips and ideas. Tips are others that have given me, an idea, and ideas are obviously my own ideas that I utilize. And so when I do these videos, I will identify tips and try to attach them to the DM that actually inform me of what they do. And ideas I will identify as my own ideas as well. Now, another caveat to ideas is that I'm not going to argue that my ideas are unique. I mean, there are hundreds of thousands, if not more, DMs out there, and we all have a common, love for tabletop RPG games, and so I'm sure that many of us kind of think of the same things that might work with what we're doing, and so we implement them. The homebrew is across the board. I don't know any DM out there who doesn't at least tweak the rules a little bit or tweak the experience of role playing games in general to their own taste and to their table's own taste as well. So without further ado, I'm going to go right into episode one. And so, episode one, I very frequently write my own adventures. It's very, very rare that I use a pre-published adventure, and usually it's a very old one if I do. And most of the adventures that I write, and this is just because I like writing low-level adventures, but most of the adventures I write are low-level. And so I find it getting kind of stale when I'm throwing in the very common creatures that the players might actually be challenged with, and that's certainly the case with the current adventure that I'm writing. I'm currently writing an adventure for Golden Glory. It's an OSR game based on the second edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. So it's kind of it's a clone of second AD&D. And as I was writing that adventure, and it's an adventure for levels 1 through 3, up to 5, possibly 6 player characters. And as I was populating the dungeon with ideas and such, and creatures and challenges, I started thinking to myself, um, uh, these have been done a gazillion times. And so, how do I make it a little bit more fresh, make it a little bit more unique? And that's when I started thinking about graders, lessers, and unique creatures and items that can be found in the game. So, as I was writing, I started thinking to myself, well, one of the things that the player characters are going to encounter are zombies. And so, how do I take the zombie and I make the zombie something a little bit different? Now, in most monster manuals, you'll have zombies and you'll have juju zombies. Where a juju zombie has a little bit more intelligent and moves faster and such, but that's still straight out of the book. So what I decided to do to make my zombies a little bit more unique is one zombie might only have one arm on it. And so I had to reduce its hit points by a slight amount. I believe I used like a 20% reduction in its hit points, and its attack for being just one armed was also reduced as well. Another zombie has no legs, and so It can only move by pulling itself across the floor, and so I modified its hit points and its movement rate, obviously, and its tactics, because it is so limited in movement. It more often than not will lie in wait for something to attack rather than trying to chase after anything. Um, a pair of zombies I have are child zombies, and so their stats were modified to account for the lower hit points, possibly a little bit faster. I haven't fully fleshed them out. Wrong word for it, but I haven't fully fleshed them out yet. But you can kind of see how, if you have your player characters being challenged by a fairly mundane creature, whether it be a zombie or a skeleton or even living things like a goblin or an orc, you can make them a little bit more unique by changing some of their abilities and such. An example of lesser is I wanted to throw a challenge in here, but because of the level limit of the adventure, and this challenge would have been far in excess of what they're capable of doing. And I'm going to show you the actual thing that I'm talking about here. So here I have flesh golem. So I was thinking to myself, you know what? I do want to put a flesh golem into this particular adventure, but I have to justify it. I have to kind of explain how it's where it's at, and why is it in such a low level dungeon, and how can I make this challenge of this creature not so far in excess of the player character's ability as a group to deal with. All right, so you can see here a flesh golem in this particular version of second edition AD&D. It has 9 hit die, all right, 40 hit points, and so on. So an 11 THAC0 does 2 slams at 2d8 for damage. So it can deal out basically 2 to 16 hit points of damage, which on the upper end will most likely kill virtually any kind of a first level character class that they're challenged by. They fight as a fighter 9, and then their immunities. They had a number of immunities, but the main one that I found to be the real stumbling block is that magic weapons needed to hit. And in my campaigns, generally speaking, in my adventures that I run, a player character group of 1 to 3 is most likely not going to have access to magic weapons. So what did I do? I made a lesser form of a flesh golem. It is weaker as far as hit dice, so fewer hit points as well. It does less damage with its attacks. It fights as a fighter level 7 rather than a 9, so I reduced it by basically 2 HD level. I removed the magic weapon ability, so the need for a magic weapon to hit it, but I made all normal weapons have a reduction in the amount of damage that they do. All right, so I still made it a little bit more resilient, and so still a challenge for the players to deal with. And then later on, it talks about and I don't know if I'll quite be able to get to it. Actually, it's over here. It says, flesh golems engage in combat. There is a 1% cumulative chance that it breaks free from its creator's control. All right, and what I did was, because this is a lesser, that means that the magic that binds it and kind of animates it is of lesser magic. And so I increased that to a 3% increase. And so per level. So 3% per level chance that it will break free of its magical bonds of control, and then just basically attack anything in sight, including the individuals on its own side. So this is one way that I figured I can take a creature that is normally not within that level band and still include it, and still be something that, more experienced players that are first level, let's say, they might say, "Oh my gosh, a flesh giant, flesh golem! I know what this thing is. I know we can't hit it. I know we can't," and so they potentially just panic and flee from it, or they see this thing and they just through trial and error they start to realize, hey, wait a second, this isn't what I was expecting, and their meta, of course, they're thinking, oh, you know what, this flesh golem does take damage from regular weapons. Maybe we can take on this challenge, and so they go forward with it. So there's an advantage, I think, in changing things up a little bit that will just be much more interesting. You could put more interesting things into your low-level dungeons by doing this. You can, of course, go the reverse of that and make something greater. So another game system, I'll switch views here. Another game system that I really like is a lot of the Bloat games, whether it be their fantasy RPG or some of their Survive This Zombies RPGs. And what they have in there is they have ways that you can add different templates to standard creatures. So you could have a rabbit, and now you can make this rabbit huge, all right, by adding the huge template to it, which modifies all of its abilities based on being huge. Then you can add zombie, so now you have the zombie huge rabbit and have all of that included in there. And then you can add in extraterrestrial. So now you have a alien zombie huge rabbit that has all of these abilities that they wouldn't have normally expected a rabbit to have. And so you end up with some kind of a crazy creation that they weren't expecting, and much more challenging than they might have anticipated. And so you can do this across the board with any creature, making them standard, lesser, unique. Unique is just taking the standard creature and tweaking it in some ways to account for different abilities it might have due, as in my example, loss of limbs or such. And so they'll function differently, even though they're still the same core. You can make things greater by just making them more powerful and giving them those additional traits, or lesser by taking what they do have in the standard version and lowering them down to match up with the player character party's basic abilities, and that way you can introduce what they might anticipate as being a much more challenging creature, but they're still able to manage it as well. So you can also do the same thing with items. So one thing that I've been doing is that I've been tweaking various poisons that they might come into contact with. In most cases, for these lower level, I've been reducing the potency of certain poisons. In other cases, I've been increasing the potency of some venoms that I thought were a little bit too weak or didn't quite have the effect that I was looking to do. And so you can alter items as well to give them different functions, or to increase their potency or decrease them, and that way you're able to give the players access to things that they that you normally wouldn't want to unbalance your game with. And so, one thing I also very commonly do is for items, let's say weapons or armor, is that rather than giving them a +1 sword that is magical, I give them a +1 sword that is non-magical, but it gets its +1 from the quality of its manufacture or from its materials or such. And so it gains that +1. And even though it's non-magical, you can still allow that +1 to hit certain creatures that only call for a +1 weapon to hit. All right, doesn't necessarily have to be a magic weapon. Although a lot of cases it'll say magical, like in the case of the Flesh Golem. It does say it has an immunity towards anything that is not a magical weapon of +1. But you can always alter that as a GM and say, hey, you know what? I still want them to be able to hit it as I did, and change that a little bit. Another example, when I made a lesser form, I was playing a D&D Beck Me campaign, running it, I should say, and I had the player party encounter a Shambling Mound. And the Shambling Mound essentially takes half damage from every single attack that it took. And so that would have led to, in my view, a lot of successful hits and damage rolls that end up doing 0 damage because of the, or very, very little damage. And that the Shambling Mound would have been much more difficult for the player characters to actually fight. And so what I did was, instead, I just gave it 50% more hit points, but allowed the players to continue to hit and deal regular damage on it. So it was just a slight tweak to the way that you handled the special abilities of the Shambling Mound, and it did make it much, it still made it a challenging fight. I mean, it literally lasted for about 12 rounds, and one of the player characters died in the encounter, and yet it still remained being the greatest challenge that their group had faced through 12 weeks of campaigning. And so it made it really it was still a monumental event in their career up to that point. And so it just worked. It worked really well. And so that's why, these are tips and ideas that worked. I'm not going to give you a tip or idea that I haven't used myself and I haven't actually seen it work. So, excuse me, once again, thank you for joining. If you have any tips or ideas that you'd like to share with me, then please feel free to put that in the comments section. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed, please consider subscribing, and I will keep on churning out these videos. I'm averaging around 2 a week. Always wanted to do more than that, but things come up and it's just harder to do to get more than 2 a week in there. But maybe someday soon I'll be able to churn them out. I've been spending a lot more time writing, and so the delay in the videos is actually going to have a benefit and paying off, because that adventure is really coming together and should be coming out very soon. So, and I'm excited about that. I'm also looking around for a 2nd edition AD&D game to play in as a player. I'm looking for a new campaign, something where I could start off with a first level character. In my case, a multi-class halfling character, fighter, thief, or someone recommended to me a gladiator thief is actually a good combo as well. So I'll take a look into that. But once again, really enjoying doing these videos. Really like talking and following other other channels and seeing what ideas they're coming up with. I will do some video responses, because I see people will put out these video responses every once in a while. I'm bringing up particular issues, and I'm about to get ready to start watching Legion of Myth on Twitch and see how their stream goes today and see if I can jump in on that discussion as well. So once again, thanks for joining. I look forward to seeing you on the gaming screen sometime soon. You all have a great afternoon and finishing up your weekend. Stay safe out there. I just realized that I am shifted halfway across the screen over here. I would normally be placed over here, but whatever. That's why it's unscripted and unchained. So once again, thanks for joining. Have a great rest of your afternoon. Take care.